Lesson 1, topic, triangle theorems and congruence, learning target, I can classify triangles and apply properties and theorems of triangles. First off, 2 theorems that we are going to talk about. You can find these theorems on your resource sheet. The first one is the corollary to the triangle sum theorem. The triangle sum theorem tells us that the interior angles of a triangle sum to 180. So addition to that fact is that if you have a right triangle is 90 degrees, then the other 2 angles are going to be complementary or add to 90 degrees. So we're going to use that in this practice problem. Find the measures of the acute angles of the right triangle in the diagram shown. So we want to know what the measure of this angle is and the measure of this angle is. Since it is a right triangle, we know that this angle is 90 degrees, meaning that these 2 angles are going to add to equal 90 degrees. They're going to be complementary. So that means I can set up an equation, 2x plus x minus 6 equals 90 degrees, and I can solve that equation. 2x plus x is 3x minus 6 equals 90 degrees. I would like you to solve the rest of that equation in Edpuzzle. You should have gotten that x equals 32. So now that's not our final answer because remember we wanted to find the measures of the acute angles of the right triangle. So if we know that x equals 32, then I know that this angle, 2x, would be 2 times the value of x, which is 32. 2 times 32 equals 64 degrees. So that angle measure would be 64 degrees. And then this angle would be 32 take away 6. 32 take away 6 would be 26. So this angle would be 26 degrees. The next theorem is the exterior angles theorem. So this theorem states the measure of an exterior angle of a triangle, so angle 1, is equal to the sum, so we're adding, of the measures of the 2 non-adjacent, or the angles that it doesn't touch, interior angles. And the 2 angles that angle 1 does not touch are angles A and angles B. So we're going to use the exterior angles theorem to find the measure of angle JKM. So the theorem states that the measure of the exterior angle, so the exterior angle is 2x minus 5, is equal to the sum, so we're adding 2 things together, of the measures of the 2 non-adjacent interior angles. So it doesn't touch angle J and angle L, so we can do x plus 70. Right now, I would like you to solve this equation and put your answer in Edpuzzle. You should have gotten that x equals 75. So if x equals 75, then what is the measure of angle JKM? Well, we plug 75 into 2x minus 5, and we get 2 times 75 minus 5. 2 times 75 is 150, minus 5 is 145. So the measure of angle JKM is 145 degrees. 2 more vocab words. Congruent figures are figures that have all the parts of one figure are congruent to the corresponding parts of the other figure. Congruent polygons, corresponding sides and corresponding angles are congruent. So you can see examples of congruent figures right here. They're the same size and shape, even though some of them are rotated and flipped around, they're still the same. These triangles, however, are not congruent because while they're all triangles, they have different sizes and some of them are shaped differently. Write a statement that indicates the triangles in each pair are congruent. So these 2 triangles are congruent because we have 3 angles that are congruent to their corresponding angle. So angle B is congruent to angle G. angle C is congruent to angle H, and angle D is congruent to angle I. You can see that by the corresponding markings on the angles. So we have 3 congruent angle pairs. And then we can see that BC is congruent to GH, CD is congruent to HI, and DB is congruent to GI. You can see that by their corresponding tick marks. So we have 3 congruent sides. So to write that the triangles are congruent, we are going to write triangle blank is congruent to triangle blank. And then we're going to name the 2 triangles. But when we name the triangles, we have to go in a specific order. So if I name this first triangle as triangle BCD, then I have to name the other triangle in the same order. So if I start with B, I have to start with G, because B and G correspond to each other because they're both congruent. So I would start with G. Then I went to C, so I'd have to go to H, because H and C correspond. And then lastly, I went to D, so I'd have to go to I, because I and D correspond. Now, we don't have to write it in just that order. We could write it in any order that we wanted to. We don't have to start with B. We could have started with C, and then DB would be congruent to triangle HIG. So we have different combinations that we can make, but we do have to make sure that our letters are corresponding in the order that the angles correspond in. Lastly, we want to find the measure of angle BDC. This diagram has 2 triangles that overlap, so I like to redraw the triangles as non-overlapping triangles. Now when you redraw the triangles, you want to make sure you label everything. So I know that angle A is 45 degrees, and I also know that it's congruent to angle B over here, so I can add that information in here. And then I also know that angle D right here on this triangle is 30 degrees, which is congruent to angle C over here on this triangle, so I can make that 30 degrees. Meaning that I can now find the measure of angle BDC. Measure of angle BDC would be this angle right here. I know that the 3 angles of a triangle add to 180 degrees. So with that information, please find the measure of angle BDC and type that in Edpuzzle.